Hello, my name is Alice Birrell, and I'm the Fashion Features Director here at Vogue Australia. Today, I'm joined with Ditte and Nicolaj from the wonderful Ganni. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us.
Of course.
Thank you for having us.
It's such a pleasure to have you all the way from Denmark dialing in. And we've been so lucky to have a Sydney store of Ganni just open up, which we're really excited about. Huge news for everyone and a lot of Ganni loyalists. But I guess, I think for us that shows a lot of the similarities between Australian style and Danish style, which is always pointed out, and I'm sure you've spoken about many times. But it's not just here that your brand resonates in Australia. It's all over the world. I wondered, Nicolaj, from your perspective, did you recognise that Ganni could be a global brand in the way that it is today from the very beginning? And Ditte, did you share that view from the start?
Well, I think it was not so much whether I knew that it could become a global brand. It was just kind of a precondition for me joining the project back then, because I have a background in tech. And looking from a tech point of view into the fashion world, I realized that a lot of, in particular, Scandinavian brands didn't really make it outside of Scandinavia. But you have an opportunity of, say, 5 to 10 years where you can kind of allow yourself to be the new kid on the block, right? The new hot brand. But if you don't manage to build a proper business behind it throughout that time frame, then you risk kind of diluting yourself as a business and as a brand. So it was a precondition for me for joining Project Ganni that we would insist on becoming an international brand.
Yeah, and well, from my point of view, when we started Ganni, we started in a small a corner of an apartment in the center of Copenhagen. So we were just having a desk in someone's living room. So I don't know if I dare to dream that big, but I really believed in the brand because I had that feeling that something was missing out of Copenhagen, that we were able to build a brand that was like my version of the Copenhagen girl. So I knew that it could be big, but I don't think that I ever would imagine that we were having a store in Australia or
But it's one thing kind of having this idea or a vision or insisting that you want to be an international brand, and then it's a completely different thing than exercising that thought, right? And turning it into practice. So and there's like, you can have a guiding vision, but it's all in the daily grind, right? It's the decisions you make on an everyday basis that ultimately ends up kind of turning you into a global brand.
Exactly. And I think, here you are 10 years later, we are celebrating the Sydney store. You're dialing in and speaking to so many people here who love your work and what you do. But I guess kind of looking at the brand as a whole, something that's unique about the brand and about you two is that, you're partners and you work together in business and you share a life together. I guess I wondered, having that personal connection, does that add a layer of, personal investment in the ethos and the passions behind the brand? And then on the other end of the spectrum, what are those challenges of working together so closely and living, in that world together?
Well, I mean, it's been 12 years of couples therapy, right? Like just talking to you about the topic. So there are definitely ups and downs, but I think most importantly, it's kind of kept us relevant to each other all throughout the years, right? We've kind of built a lot of respect and admiration for each other in the process. And I think in many ways, we've been good at kind of pulling the other one up from a dark hole if you've had rough times at work. And that happens. It happens all the time, right? But we've been good at kind of balancing it out. Like the hard bit is if you both hit the button at the same time, right?
And at the same time, Ganni has also been a passion for both of us. It's not just about work. It is a true passion and something that we can share, which is, I think, it's just making us a stronger couple.
But we've had to kind of put in place kind of rules for how we interact and how we are kind of private about some things and how we go about talking about work, right? So for many years, we had this rule that nobody can mention anything from work after 8 o'clock at night, right? Because otherwise you just kind of, if you were bugged by something and you kind of pass that bug on to your significant half, right? And then you were kind of relieved, but the other one would kind of be kept awake at night thinking about how to solve problems like that. So we kind of had a few rules in place that definitely helped us.
True. 8 o'clock is still quite late at night though, so I'm sure you're both working very hard.
True.
So I guess, the big thing that we wanted to talk about today as well is, obviously the sustainable aspect of Ganni. And I know, you don't always like to use the word sustainability, and you've sort of pointedly used the word responsibility. I guess I'd love for you to explain that deliberate choice of wording and why that was so important to you.
Well, I mean, it's about I've been kind of involved with the climate change agenda for 25 years for odd reasons, and kind of ending up in the fashion industry was somewhat of a contradiction, right? So I've had to come to terms with that, and I've been kind of sharing my concerns with Ditte all throughout the year. So it's been an ongoing conversation in between us. Having said that, though, I guess a little bit like with red meat, right? I didn't realize that red meat was a bad thing until, 5-10 years ago, right? From a climate perspective. And I reduced my consumption of red meat. Same thing with fashion. I was not aware that the fashion industry was worse off than any other industry when we embarked on Project Ganni, right? But when we became aware that from a climate perspective, it's not really a good thing. We had like these endless conversations internally about whether it made sense to put another fashion brand out there. And we've been going back and forth over that over the years, but ultimately ended up agreeing that as long as we do better than most other alternatives out there, we can allow ourselves to continue to do fashion. We just need to do it responsibly, right? However, that also kind of involves you acknowledging that fashion is raw consumption, right? We don't need more garments out there. So talking about sustainability or circularity for that matter is very, very sensitive, right? So that's why we coined the term responsibility. And I specifically remember back in 2015, 2016, when we were kind of talking about this concept, then a couple of other brands, Ace and Tate, Noah, the streetwear brand from New York, kind of launched similar thoughts. I think that was in 2017. And I read the newsletter from Ace and Tate founder Mark, and they had kind of the same thought. So we realized that there was probably some kind of a zeitgeist going on, and we decided to embrace that concept and let that be the guiding principle for how we go about working with sustainability. The sensitive bit is still, though, that it can't be an excuse. It can't be like paying indulgence, right? You can only allow yourself to talk about responsibility if you are persistent in your doing better every day, right? It cannot be an excuse.
And I think that's definitely reflected in the things that you're doing, with the brand at the moment and in recent years. And I guess I'm going to pull up some numbers at the moment. And you guys have an incredible amount of information available for your customer. But I think 2019 was the first Ganni game plan, the first responsibility strategy. You had 44 goals for 2023. You reached, and correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, but you reached 40 of those goals. Then you evolved those remaining goals for a 2025 strategy. And now you have a 2027 strategy and ambition, which includes carbon reduction by 50%, which is all very impressive. But I think, when we're talking about accountability and setting, and you do set accountability for yourself, how do you balance that idea of setting these big targets and being ambitious and really challenging yourself in the business with being realistic with what you can actually achieve?
So, practically speaking, from a day-to-day perspective, we go about it like probably any other strategy process, right? So you dream up scenarios that you'd like to achieve, like 5 or 10 years down the road. and then you reality check what your dreams are. I mean, does it literally make sense? So specifically, we apply a concept called scenario-based thinking, where we kind of dream up how we'd like to see Ganni 5 years down the road, like with our 50% carbon reduction, for instance. And then we backtrack till today and kind of break it down into tangible targets or KPIs and investigate whether that makes sense. And then you somewhat strike an internal compromise between kind of dreams and practicalities and figure out what do you think you can achieve by still kind of pushing the limits for what like practicalities of today will tell you are your limits, right? So that's kind of, it's a compromise. I guess that's very Danish, right? We're so driven by consensus. So even internally in our company, it's all consensus driven.
And I think part of, this incredible strategy is your Fabrics for the Future initiative, which is really quite incredible. And I mean, I'd encourage people to go and look up what's going on with that and looking at the innovation that you're introducing into the business. I guess it's all about finding different ways of working and, harnessing that innovation for solutions for, raw materials and not introducing them into the chain, the supply chain. I guess, can you talk us through the Fabrics of the Future program? I guess a brief overview, because there is a lot of detail, but and how you're replacing certain fabrics and which of those innovations that you're most excited about at the moment.
Yeah, so I can provide a bit of context, and then Ditte can tell more about how to work with that on a day-to-day basis. So I guess it's all derived from the thought of trying to reduce your carbon footprint, right? So when you go about mapping out your carbon footprint, which we did retrospectively first time in 2016, right? So that was an exercise that took place in 2017. Looking back at 2017, you realize that the predominant part of your carbon footprint is derived from the actual product and the actual fabric going into that product. So you realize that in order to reduce your carbon footprint, you need to kind of use responsible alternatives or alternative fabrics that are better than the conventional version, right? Ideally, something that's recycled because it's already out there, it's been produced by someone else, or innovative new materials that have a significantly lower carbon footprint. Those are lab grown. Sometimes they are definitely kind of developed and put out there by startups, new companies that are typically fueled by venture capital money. And it's very early days of them trying to put a commercially viable product in the market. So there's a huge amount of unknown factors. And as a fashion brand, you rarely have R&D inside, right? So you rely on an ecosystem of external players that will bring those products forward to the market. And then, so that brings me to Fabrics of the Future. It's a virtual team internally in Ganni where we work with these innovative new startups on kind of making sure that there's a product market fit between what they are doing and what we need. And then we help them kind of test and scale up their product, and we act as a launchpad or a marketing platform for them. But ultimately, what we want to do with those materials is kind of bring them to the market in a way or shape or form where it's kind of commercially viable for others to kind of tap into that, so we can reach scale. Currently, we're kind of constantly looking at around 30 different innovative new materials that we, as I test along like a range of criteria like look and feel, aesthetics, performance, durability, permeability, et cetera, but also scale, cost, stuff like that. And then ultimately we enter into offtake agreements to kind of help them bring the product to market. Sorry.
So Nicolaj, you can get a lot that you can just go on and on. When you talk about climate change, global warming, it was actually 20 years ago when we met. And at that time, no one would be talking about that. It would, it was not something you would, discuss during a dinner or anything, but now it's something we talk about more or less every day. But it can be quite depressing, but actually from my point of view, like being on the creative side, I've seen like working with Fabric of the Future. In the beginning, it was, to be honest, it was very, very depressing. There was not much to work with. I felt like every time we had some new fabrication, it was very dull, it was very dry, and not so much fun stuff going on. But the last couple of seasons, we have seen so many alternatives. And I feel like every day we're like the Fabric of the Future team, they're providing us with so many interesting materials that we can just dive into. So I'm actually starting to be very positive here.
Your job is less hard, Ditte. Your job is to bring the desirability, I suppose, to these fabrics and these innovations. So, in some ways, do you feel that your job is easier?
I feel it has become much easier. Yes, I remember the first time we talked about starting to phase out leather. It was like, from the design team, it was like, no, it's one of our favorite qualities to work with. It has so much structure. It has this like luxury feeling. Everyone loves it. And we were really struggling. It was very hard to find an alternative to that. But for next show, you're going to see a new material that the team from Fabric of the Futures have worked with that we're very excited about. And we're also going to phase out some of our biggest commercial driver is actually the Chelsea boot, and that's going to be switched from leather to cactus now.
And how has your customer responded to that? I mean, do you feel you have cult pieces like cowboy boots that everybody loves and they've been traditionally in leather, but how do you go about re-educating the consumer, and what are they responding like at the moment to these changes?
So generally speaking, people appreciate the effort and buy into the idea. We've also had some kind of somewhat weird hiccups with the customers that are because leather is perceived as a luxury good, although it's actually a commodity. It's abundant out there, unless we're talking exotic leathers, right? It goes into literally a lot of products. And people forget that because they still have this perception that it's luxury, but calf leather is not necessarily. So there's still a little bit of a reluctance, although you can't necessarily identify a difference between lab-grown leather or a real leather, right? There's still a little bit of a resistance because you want the leather because it's more luxurious in your perception, right? So we've had funny reactions like that I hadn't expected, but I understand the mechanism, right? But overall speaking, people are supporting the idea. Bear in mind, though, that there's not a consumer out there that wants to pay a premium for a sustainably or responsibly sourced product. And I totally understand that. It's like our moral obligation to bring that option to the end consumer. It has to be identical to a conventionally sourced product, because otherwise we're never gonna get these responsibility efforts to scale.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And look, I wanted to talk to you about something that not many businesses have, or that I'm aware of, but your carbon squad, which I think is a great idea and quite amazing. But, can you tell me, what is it about? What does it do in a nutshell? Because I know we're running short on time. And, I guess you plan for it to be obsolete. You don't want it to exist forever. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So the Carbon Squad is one of many virtual teams that operate across the entire organization. It's cross-departmental. It's a team that drives us towards our carbon target, which is a 50% reduction in absolute terms of our carbon footprint by 2027 compared to 2021 or 2020. It's because we consider anything that pertains to responsibility a change management project, right? So you need to ensure that it's anchored throughout the organization, that everybody embraces it and adopts it and makes it part of their default mode of operation, right? What you'd like to avoid is this situation where the sustainability department or responsibility department dictates KPIs or ambitions that we need to achieve, and it's not anchored with all the other departments. Like that's the situation we want to avoid. I usually compare that to being in tech in the late 90s when the internet emerged, right? And it would end up with the marketing department because we looked at it as some kind of sales tool, right? And then fast forward to today where it's abundant, right? It's everywhere. We all kind of use the internet and software tools, and we think digitalization before anything else, right? And you'd want the same thing to happen with the responsibility agenda, right? It has to be baked into everything you do. And the Carbon Squad is one example of that. It's kind of trying to make that knowledge diffuse throughout the organization.
Also because it's so important to talk about sustainability in a more soft way, so that to engage people, and so it's not just something the management is talking about and something that would just go over your head. And
exactly. So we work with Ganni with responsibility along two axes. So there's like awareness and impact, right? And it's because some of the projects that have the biggest impact can be quite boring. Kind of mapping out your entire supply chain throughout to tier 4 is a full-time job for someone, but it's not really relevant for a lot of people, right? So it's high on impact, but low on awareness, right? Or low on engagement. Whereas when we grow oyster mushrooms in the coffee grounds from our espresso machine in the cantina, and it's put at display in the canteen, right? Everybody can kind of see it and engage with it. And we harvest them every Thursday and we literally eat them, right? And it's Instagram friendly and all of that, but it has like close to zero impact. It's more an educational effort that ensures that people can relate to our responsibility project. So we always had that dynamic going on. Right.
Now, I'm sure there's a lot of people, listening to this and thinking, what an inspiring place to work. And there are a lot of businesses who are building things like you, with this incredible component that's working towards, responsible practice. I wondered what you both look for in someone who works at Ganni or might want to have a role in this space. What would you say to them? What kind of skills could they look for to really best position themselves to do something like this in the future?
I mean, from my perspective, I unless you want to work specifically in the responsibility department, I'd much rather see people with a variation of backgrounds, like from finance to production to sourcing to logistics to whatever, like specialize in whatever they do and then embrace the sustainability agenda, right? Because we need it kind of baked into everything we do. And then there are obviously expert roles within responsibility where you need to adapt a certain area of expertise. But else than that, I'd rather see people with a sense of purpose and people that are willing to embrace the agenda no matter what background they have.
Well, hopefully there are more and more people like that out there today, and we encourage them all. But thank you so much, Ditte, and thank you, Nicolaj, for your time. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for having us.
Now it's back to Jess over at the Vogue Codes Summit.